You're listening to Sox in the Basement, a production of the Broadcast Basement Limited, where every show is 30 minutes of good and comes from a basement bar on the south side of Chicago. Pull up a stool, pour a cold one, and join us right now for Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at soxinthebasement.com. Ed and I are heading away for the weekend. Not just us.
I think just us. That started off odd, but okay.
I think we have like 15 to 20 people going to this thing. Big Giant Bash. It's an annual reunion from our first radio station. And everybody still gets together and talks about the glory days and drinks a lot. And they play wiffle ball. And we draft fantasy football teams. What do we have, 16 teams in this league now? It's crazy.
Now it's up to 16 teams, which means that literally anybody gets one injury and their team is just done.
You know, I don't even know how that big of a league is going to work. This is the biggest that it's ever been. And a huge amount of people, and I'm hosting this year at the Family Lake Cottage. And it should be a blast, and I'm looking forward to it. And I, today, for the first time, downloaded an app to help me with my draft. And I was laughing about it because I remember when I started doing fantasy football back at the turn of the millennia, right? Right there,
right
around 2000, maybe in the late 90s. I started doing it in Sandbox, I think was the online.
Sandbox was what we used when we started the league that you and I are talking about.
Right,
yeah.
That's how old that league is. That's before all the big boys like ESPN and CBS Sports and everybody got involved and started making fantasy. You know, I mean, and the guys before that were checking box scores and adding things up manually and sending them out to their friends. Like, this is what you scored this week. Like, that's what it used to be like for fantasy baseball and for fantasy football. You used to get the newspaper and then start adding things up. I mean, think about the arguments that come from that. And I remember I used to have to sit down and just plan out for weeks on end my draft strategy. I had to figure out if a guy was going to be any good. I would get a magazine, but a lot of times I was like using my own formulas to try to project whether or not that player was going to be better. But as a fan, as somebody running a team, I had to do a lot of legwork, and it had me thinking today about that's how it used to be with baseball stats. Like, for me to understand if a player was good, you had Bill James, but you had to wait for the book to come out, right? And you had baseball cards, but they didn't give an awful lot of information. It was like average, home runs, your walks, your strikeouts. You never saw OPS on there, right?
No, there was. I mean, you'd have like the on-base percentage, but you wouldn't necessarily even have like the slugging percentage sometimes. It's really just home runs, RBIs, average, walks, strikeouts. I mean, it was very basic information that you had access to.
Right. And then if you wanted to figure out if a guy was any good, you saw him in person, you watched him on TV, you had an argument with somebody else at a bar like Cork and Carry at the park, 33rd and Princeton, in the shadow of the ballpark with the award-winning menu of burgers and ballpark favorites. That is the place to be, indoor, outdoor, for any baseball discussion or non-baseball discussion. It's a fun spot to hang out at. I've been there on non-game days.
Oh yeah, you don't need to go there just because there's a game.
I've been there on days where I don't even go over to the ballpark. Like, I actually go, enjoy the pregame, and then there's like a crowd that still hangs out and just watches it on TV because they don't want to give Jerry any money. I love that crowd. That crowd's fun. Like, if you want to watch a ball game, go over to the Cork and eat some food. It'll cost you less, the beer and the food, than standing in the ballpark, and you get a lot more conversation, a lot more fun with White Sox fans. See everything they have going on at corkandcarry.com. But you would discuss it with people. You'd watch guys with your naked eye. You would see some highlights maybe in the morning on ESPN in the 90s and the early 2000s, and that's how you decided if a guy was any good or if a team was any good. And so a team and their PR department could kind of put out things to bend your opinion. Like, we're young. We're getting better. Look at this guy here. He's on a hot streak. He could be our future. We're just running into teams at the wrong time. That's why we're losing.
We've had bad luck.
Right. We've had bad luck, right? And I think you bought it more 30 years ago, right?
Oh, yeah. You would buy it all the time. I mean, you would pick out a handful of players that you really liked, and you'd see them have some success. You'd be like, oh, it's just a couple more base hits and their average would be higher. A couple more biscuits for breakfast, and that ball doesn't hit the warning track, it goes out. Or, maybe the wind was weird that day, or it was cold or whatever. And you could sit there and you could talk yourself into, here's why this team could be much better down the road. And you could see a guy sit there and say, okay, I like how this guy's stuff looks on the mound. He just needs better control. Like, and there was always just one of those things, like you could look at this and go, if this guy did this, he would just be better. And we can still do that. The problem is that we can also see things like spin rotation on a pitch. Okay. We can see, velocity readings. We can get an idea of what this guy does in certain situations against certain batters, and patterns can emerge. Statistical patterns can emerge, and you can't argue with them as easily, because if a guy, for example, looks great on the mound, right? Like you like his motion, you like the way the pitches break, you like, the way everything looks, and you sit there and go, he just needs a little bit of something just to get him over the hump. When you go and look and you find out that the guy cannot get a left-hander out to save his life, and they've got an OPS of like 1.2, against him, and it's like, well, okay, so mathematically, statistically speaking, it's not just give him a tweak. This guy is toast. He's never going to get a left-handed batter out. The league will figure that out very, very quickly, and he's done. And there is no hope for that guy except for to be a very niche player. And so because we can do that, you can lose hope a heck of a lot faster. The other thing, too, is that it's one of those where the game is so national now, where I know a heck of a lot more about other teams than I used to 30 years ago, where 30 years ago, you didn't get the coverage because they would, we'd be stuck in Chicago. You'd hear about the Cubs, you'd hear about the White Sox, and who they were playing, right? And you got to see the teams that they were playing. So I might know a lot about the Twins because the Sox played them a lot. I might know a lot about the Indians back when they were the Indians. I might know a lot about the Tigers, but I don't necessarily know much about, say, the Mariners, because I might have not watched those games when they were on the West Coast, or not watched them as keenly because it was late and I was doing other things or I was asleep. I mean, 30 years ago, yes, I did sleep. But it was a situation where now I can also look at the stats there, and I can just sit there and say, look, I just know that the Mariners are better these ways than the White Sox are, and this is why they have hope. I can look at their minor league teams. We know a hell of a lot more about farm systems than we used to.
You can go on the internet and pull up all the minor league stats. They give you so much, and now there's so many advanced stats. WRC plus is such a big stat, and it takes into account whether or not you're in a different ballpark and the different dimensions and what the ball could have done in most places, and it gives you a real idea of whether or not that person's a contributor at the plate. And I always say the easiest thing, like there's certain stats I always fall back on, right? Like with pitchers, I love the walks and hits per innings pitched stat, because if you're not putting guys on, you're effective. In my mind, it's just such a great, quick stat to look at. I know you can get deeper on guys and you can find other little things. It's a quick stat. With hitters, it's OPS. So let me ask you this question. Watching this team, taking stats out of it, you would find a couple of guys that you would be like, well, they haven't had a great year, but I mean, like, they're still a hitter, right? Like you might convince yourself that Luis Robert Jr., he's had his ups and his downs, but he's still a hitter, right? Gavin Sheets has been hot lately, and Andrew Vaughn's got 14 home runs. There's a few guys in here that are at least average in Major League Baseball. Wouldn't you think that, like, just kind of watching it, that you would believe that? But if I look at the OPS of this team, if I just bring up the White Sox stats right now, knowing that the average OPS, which is your on-base percentage added to your slugging percentage, so it's taking into account how often you're getting on base, and then all of your extra base hits are weighted differently. You get more into your slugging percentage for a double than you do for a single, more for a triple than you do for a double, more for a home run than you do for a triple. And so that number grows and grows and grows. And you add that together, the league average generally every year is between maybe like 715 and 725. Nobody on this team for the year has an OPS at 700. Everybody's in the sixes or lower. I remember when we used to sit down during the window, remember the very, very short window that the White Sox themselves destroyed. And I would sit down at the beginning of every season and I would put down OPS versus left-handers, OPS versus righties, total OPS. Let's see if we can find a team here. Who's the best guy for this position? We should be playing this guy over this guy. This guy should be down the lineup. Like, that's the kind of discussions we used to have on this show. We used to go through that stuff. And I remember I would have like color coding for, okay, they're over 700. They're over the league average. They're at 790 or higher. They're at 850 or higher. They're at 900 or higher. We got none of that. Everybody's just a blue color, which was bad. I used to sit there and say, Leury Garcia shouldn't be starting on this team as much as he is because he's the only guy who can't have an OPS over 700. Leury would be one of the best players on this team right now. The numbers tell me that. Not watching guys, because if I was watching, I'd be like, well, he still can't play center field, but they keep throwing him out there. But just like the numbers would tell you that, and that's incredible to me. It's warm this weekend, but there was a chill earlier in the week. A little colder than it normally is in August. I had the windows open in the house. My youngest got the sniffles. You may be looking at your window and saying, I want a better one before it gets really cold in a couple of months. And that's why you're going to reach out to Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. In fact, don't just reach out. Go in and see them. Half block east of 159th and Ridgeland at 6280 159th Street. Exterior windows, doors, patio doors, storm doors. They're not coming to you. You're going to see them. That way you get to see every option that is available to you with an owner in the showroom, and there will be one on site on installation day. They use their own installers. They don't farm out the work. They've been doing it this way for 40 years in Oak Forest since 1985. All major brands, no stock items. It's all custom made. Again, 6280 159th Street, Window and Door Superstore of Oak Forest. See more at windowdooroakforest.com.
To your point about looking at guys, when Andrew Vaughn goes on a hot streak, which he does seemingly every year, he gets a nice little heat up there, runs on a heater for a few weeks, and then sort of settles back in. When you watch somebody like that, when you watch Andrew Vaughn, and again, optics of just watching a team, I like Andrew Vaughn's setup at the plate. I when he takes it out to right field and stuff like that, that's a good look.
He looks good, right? Like if I were watching him naked eye, I'd be like, he looks good when he does it. I mean, he's definitely a ball player. If I didn't have all these stats, I'd like him more, I think.
Absolutely. And it's the same thing with Gavin Sheets. I mean, Sheets goes on these runs. When you see Gavin Sheets hit a home run, and he usually hits them, he doesn't hit cheapies. The problem with Gavin Sheets is that he hits the prodigious ones, but he doesn't get enough cheapies. When I look at the overall stats and I see not just that he only has 8 home runs at this point, but a supposed slugger with an OPS of 689. Now, granted, a lot of that comes from, a mediocre on-base percentage, but his on-base percentage at 313 isn't so bad that it would drag it down. It's the 376 slugging percentage. When we look at all these numbers and you look at his OPS plus and he's still below average, it's just one of those things where you're sitting there going, I would like to like Gavin Sheets. I'd like to believe that he still has something, but the numbers tell me that this guy is just not what he should be or what we need him to be, and maybe what we were sold that he was going to be. So looking at players, looking at Corey Lee hitting 10 home runs, when I see Corey Lee as a catcher who has not been a starter up until Martin Maldonado was let go, and I see his 10 home runs, in my mind's eye, I might sit there and go, hey, once he really got the gig, man, this kid started to get going, and I bet you given a full season, like he could really thump the ball out. And maybe he could, maybe if you gave him 120 starts next year, he could absolutely do it, but he's already played in 101 games and he's got 10 home runs. And it's one of those things where no, at this point, I would expect Corey Lee next year maybe to hit 15 home runs and maybe get a better batting average out of him. And all we can do, though, is we can look at his minor league numbers. We can look at his major league numbers, and we can sit there and sort of extrapolate, does Corey Lee still have a future versus somebody like Gavin Sheets, who you might want to like, but the numbers at this point in his major league career suggest that we know what Gavin Sheets is, and Gavin Sheets is not the slugger, not the left-handed thump that we need him to be. He's a lifetime 232 hitter with an OPS under 700. He's got a 690 OPS for his career. That's just not getting it done.
It's not good enough. Like, these guys would all be backups on other teams.
If they were even on the team.
Right, exactly. Like, so you're perfect example, and I'm going to get old now. For our younger listeners, and be like, oh, they are old. Every once in a while, we're reminded they're in their 40s. All right? I'm going to look back on a team that as a kid, let's say I'm my son's age. I think I'm 9 years old in 1986. Chicago White Sox of 1986.
86
right?
White Sox.
All right. Well before, when Bill James was writing these crazy stats in books, and the only way I got to read them is if I went down to Dad's basement, down off the laundry room on the south side, where he would hide down there and, shave, probably read a book and get away from his damn kids for a couple hours, right? Like just kind of like, I'm just gonna hide down here in the basement and I'm gonna watch a ball game on a black and white TV because we still had one down in the basement. And the unfinished side of the basement, he had a black and white TV. He had a bathroom where he kept his Bill James books so he could take 2 hours on the toilet, and he wasn't in there doing anything except just reading and hiding from his family. But like that's what he was doing, okay? And that's the only way you could get those stats. So otherwise, we were just watching guys. And this is the year where Tony gets fired. La Russa gets fired, and you get all this turnover with the team. They finished 72-90, fifth in the American League. You get Jim Fergosi in there, Antonio La Russa as manager, Ken Harrelson, the Hawk.
Oh, don't forget Doug Rader for 2 games.
Right, for 2 games, and the Hawk Ken Harrelson is your general manager, okay? And you've got names on there like Carlton Fisk, Greg Walker, future batting coach in 2005, Greg Walker. Ozzie Guillen's on this team. Bobby Bonilla plays on this team. John Cangelosi, who's been on this show before. Ron Kittle, who's been on this show before, both on this team. Harold Baines.
You still have Harold.
Is on this team. Darryl Boston's on this team. This is a team that actually won the year before. And if I take a look at what their yearly stats were, I'm astounded that guys that I was in love with, just watching them on TV, that my dad thought was good, and then actually looking at what they were doing at the plate, how bad they were. Some of them were good, right? Like Greg Walker had an 838 OPS in a terrible season. His OPS plus, which means he's 100 means he's at league average, was 122. Harold Baines had an 803 OPS. His OPS plus was 113. Even Darryl Boston was just above average with a 762 OPS. In fact, the average OPS for baseball was probably at about 740 in 1986, from what I can see looking at the numbers right now, scanning through it. I mean, it was a high. Major League Baseball was hitting the ball better in 1986 in terms of OPS than they are right now. That's how good players were. And so if you were just at 700, you were below. You need to be higher than that. Carlton Fisk is a 600 OPS for the season. Ozzie Guillen, 576.
Which Ozzie was never that much of a hitter.
No, he wasn't. But here's one that really stands out to me. I love Ron Kittle. You know I love me some Ron Kittle. Ron Kittle's like my first ball player I always loved. Hit rooftop shots. Ron Kittle, 705 OPS.
He had a 282 on-base percentage. Ron Kittle did nothing but hit 17 home runs that year, and that was about all. That's
about all he did. Bobby Bonilla, who's a heck of a ball player, 715. He was still below league average. Back then, we wouldn't have even understood what these numbers were, but there's a reason why they finished well under 500. Harrelson thought it was because of the manager, where whatever you say about Tony right now, and what Tony is, because he's a little old and the game has passed him by and he doesn't get some of the things that now are the edges that teams take because he doesn't believe in them or whatever, and he falls asleep in the dugout and he just was not very good with that group. He was terrible with that group. But he does go on to go win multiple World Series with the Oakland A's after they get rid of him. He wasn't the problem. But nobody was paying any attention to it because on the field, it looked like it made sense. It was like, these are the same guys from last year. This guy's still good. Look, he had a great week. The eye test made you think it had to be the manager. And it wasn't. It was a lack of production from the players that were out there on the field. I mean, they went out there and gave Tim Hewlett 150 games at third base. The guy hit 231 with a 639 OPS. They should have ended up in fifth place, right? But you didn't understand it back. Like, here's the thing. You take away the fact that I was 9. Adults didn't understand it. They were probably watching that team going, something's not right here. But I can't figure out what it is because when I go, it still feels the same. The numbers change everything about how we watch sports now. The numbers change how we evaluate players. The numbers are the reasons why if the PR department for the White Sox puts something out to us or the social media tries to highlight only the good, that we see through it now. White Sox Twitter and all these podcasts and everything, I don't think they even exist. Even if the technology exists, they don't exist and thrive as well with fans being as informed about their team in the 80s because we weren't aware of how you could just dissect a guy and figure out if he was good or not. If it was him or if it was the coach, if he's in the wrong spot in the batting order, because everything was done on a feeling. I think it's really changed the way that we look at sports. I mean, for the same reason why I don't need to prep now for fantasy football. I'm just going to pay $20 for an app that's going to suggest players to me, and I'll probably end up in the top 5. And I don't even prep for the league. I just use an app, because now I can just sit there and say, I want to focus on guys that do these things, because this is what I think shows consistency. So just give me guys on the list that are this way, and I just punch it in. I use stats to pick what I want to do. And that's what we do here now. We sit there and we look at players and we go, well, Andrew Vaughn looks good up there, but he kind of sucks. And he's not really that good, and they should move on from him. And the same thing with Gavin Sheets. I mean, looks like an affable guy. Every time I see a video of him, you're like, that's a guy I would probably like to hang out with. I wouldn't want him playing for my baseball team regularly, but he looks like the kind of guy I'd like to hang out with. The perception has changed, Ed, because of the numbers. Well,
and back to that 86 White Sox team, you know, you look at the guys, I'm just going to throw their names out here. There were 8 guys that started double-digit games for that team that year. Richard Dotson, Floyd Bannister, Steve Carlton, Tom Seaver, Jose De Leon, Joel Davis, Neil Allen, and Joe Cowley.
Some of those are some great names. The White Sox like to grab guys that are great names, but maybe past their prime by like 5 to 10 years. It always happened. It happened before Kenny Williams was chasing Ken Griffey Jr. and the Alomars all over the place. It was happening back in the 80s, too.
No, which makes it a Jerry Reinsdorf thing, if you ask me. Because even think about Carlton Fisk. Think about how long Pudge's career was for the Red Sox before he joined the White Sox. Like in 1986, Carlton Fisk is 38 years old, right? I mean, that's not a young man at that point, and he had only been with the team for, at that point, 6 years.
Right, but he was on a down year. Let's just be honest. He was an all-star the year before, and in the years after, 782, 919, 830, 829 OPSs. So, like, he wasn't done yet. How the hell was he
not done?
How the hell was he doing that at the plate at 42 years old?
Because Carlton Fisk is an amazing athlete and was an amazing baseball player.
Like, you don't even hear about horse steroids back then, right? Like, nobody even said,
no.
He didn't look like a guy who was like that. Like, his head didn't swell like Barry Bonds, right? Like, you never hear anything. How was he recovering that well that he was doing that? I mean, in his first fall off year in 91, he's got a 712 OPS, which, like I said, that's normally around average, and he's an all-star at 43 after that run that I just described in his late 30s into his early 40s. That's incredible.
And catching and not using the DH role.
And he's catching more than 100 games. In 85 was 153, then 86, 125, 135. He has a short year in 88, 76. 103 games he catches in 89, 137 in 90. Plays 134 games in 91. That guy's a god.
Undoubtedly. But he's also a guy, to my greater point here, Carlton Fisk is an anomaly in that regard, okay? He was signed as a 31-year-old. He was signed as a guy who was well-established. And at that point, you're willing to give Carlton Fisk in 1986, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt because he's Carlton Fisk, man. That's one of the greatest ball players I'm ever going to watch
You're
play.
letting him play. He's breaking out of it at any moment.
At any minute. Say, now Harold Baines had a good Harold Baines year, but it was the same kind of thing. But Ron Kittle, as you mentioned, bad year in 86. I'm giving Ron Kittle, he could break out of that at any moment. That ball's going over that left field.
Yeah,
roof.
but now we know because he came on our show and he talked about it, a year or so ago, I think was when he actually had that story for us. That when he got hurt against the Orioles in 83, it changed his career forever. He was never able to do the same things. So by 86, the team should have been aware of that. The team should have understood that physically he could never be what he was in 1983 ever again. So it's another shortcoming on another Jerry Reinsdorf team. But that was the thing with him. But if you look at that lineup, he's necessary to keep in there, even with his slightly below average OPS in the lineup, because they had so many other holes in the lineup, you had to use them.
Well, and here's the thing, though. It's trading on the names, right? So in 86, when I see a starting rotation that includes Richard Dotson, Floyd Bannister, Steve Carlton, and Tom Seaver, and I had a Tom Seaver poster, White Sox poster, again, the life-size one that you could measure yourself against. I had that hanging in my room forever. That team on paper, just by saying those names, and then understanding that you had other guys that are filling in here, to help out with the age and all that stuff. And you got a guy, some younger guys like Jose De Leon is a younger guy at that point and puts up a 2.96 ERA that year. You sit there and you go, gosh, there's this team, they could still turn this thing around because those are like Hall of Fame caliber guys. They are well past their prime because Seaver and Carlton are both 41 years old. And so when you have that, and the White Sox, I think, have been good at this since in the Jerry Reinsdorf era of there's always some guys that are veteran guys you could sit there and go, they could break back out of it. This was a great player. Okay, Bo Jackson after the hip injury. Bo had some great years. I'm not going to argue, but Bo Jackson was not the same guy that he was before the hip injury. It's one of those things that, we had the Ellis Burks renaissance on the South Side. Frankly, Jermaine Dye was kind of a lucky find because Jermaine Dye had some not so great years leading up to him being a member of the White Sox. There's just a lot of that happens there. And then we were always able to be sold, though, that there are rookies coming up. There are guys coming behind us that are going to be great. Not good, not just serviceable, but great. So you can't tell me that when you and I are 9 years old in 1986 and Carlton Fisk is playing left field sometimes because that's what Hawk wanted.
That is true.
And we're looking at 22-year-old Ron Karkovice come in with a 758 OPS and 101 OPS plus, and he throws guys out, and he also looks like a traffic cop, like he was born that way. Officer Karkovice, we're sitting there going like, hey, that is a guy, like that guy might be better than Fisk someday if he keeps up, the way he's going. Now we know Officer Karkovice, he was a good catcher. He did some things at the plate.
Not a big hitter.
He was not a Hall of Famer. Not an All-Star.
Not even
an All-Star.
No. The numbers are great. They really are. I think that the numbers are the reason why we're able now to hold teams accountable. That's the thing. Jerry doesn't get that. I wonder if somebody should show Jerry that all this stuff is online. Hey, Jerry, when you say these things or you make us go say them, they can disprove it with like a couple of clicks on a screen. Really? Yeah. They can see everything. They see your whole record. They see all of your ineptitude. They see everything you're bad at. They see all of your failings. They see all the crap that you have spewed that was not true, and they can disprove anything that comes out of this place. They know exactly what this team is. And then he probably just shrugs and goes on about his day, lighting cigars with $100 bills. Joining me on the phone line right now, the Sox nerd Dave Marin, who has gone through one heck of a long season, putting up all of those tidbits and interesting little trivia nuggets on the scoreboard, and it has been a slog for him, but he does it for you, and he's brought to you by the Village of Lamont. Want to experience a downtown with real history, great eats and drinks, and green spaces filled with adventure? Visit the Village of Lamont. Shop, dine, drink, explore, and see everything they have going on this weekend and beyond at lamontdowntown.com. Nerd, how do you have anything more positive to say? I can't believe you come up with something every week, and you keep it light. What do you got for me this week?
Here we go. Chris, the Mets visit the Guaranteed Rate Field next week afforded me the opportunity to dig for nuggets on a foe the Sox rarely play. In fact, the 16 games the Sox have played against the Mets are their lowest against any opponent. For the record, the Sox are 7-9 against Gotham's NL team. The greatest Met of them all, the legendary Tom Seaver, played for the Sox from 1984 to 1986. I've touched on Tom Terrific's time with the Sox on this pod before. However, it bears repeating that Seaver's 33-28 Sox record could have been better because he was on the losing end of a shutout 6 times in 1984 and 1985, and he left with a lead that the bullpen blew 6 times in 1984. You might find it surprising that Robin Ventura hit the most homers while playing for the Sox and Mets. Robin hit 248 long balls, 177 came with the Sox while playing for both teams. 2 men, Jeff Torborg, whom I adored, and Jerry Manuel, have managed both teams, and Seaver and Roberto Alomar are the only Hall of Famers to play for the Sox and Mets. Seaver, Cleon Jones, Jerry Koosman, Al Weiss, J.C. Martin, and Tommy Agee were members of the 1969 Miracle Mets to play for the Sox, while, get this list, Willie Harris, Carl Everett, John Adkins, Shingo, Juan Uribe, El Duque, and Raul Casanova were members of the 2005 Sox to play for the Mets. The greatest game between the teams came on June 1st, 2016, when Matt Albers and his .057 average lofted a dying Quail to left, and the portly reliever had enough chug in him to reach second base to start the 13th inning. After scooting to third on a wild pitch, Albers ambled home on a sac fly to give the Sox a 2-1 win in New York. That sequence was so unique and so hilarious, Topps issued a special online card for it. Then there are the 1962 Mets, who are an all-time worst 40 and 120. Only two members of that disaster, pitcher Bob Miller and catcher Joe Ginsberg, played for the Sox. I hate to bring this up, but the 1962 Mets played 3 exhibition games against the White Sox, and they won them all. Before I get to my zinger, a reminder, you can access my blog at soxinthebasement.com, and there is plenty of Sox nerd material on Twitter and on the scoreboard at Guaranteed Rate Field. My zinger, the Sox have used a club record 58 players already this season, breaking the mark of 56 they set a season ago. The Sox have a long way to go, though, to break the MLB record, which is 69 by the 2021 Cubs, or the AL standard, which is 67 set by the 2019 Mariners. That's it, Chris. More than you probably want to know about the Mets, Matt Albers, Robin Ventura, Jerry Manuel, and fluid rosters.
Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement. Sox in the basement.
Sox in the Basement. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always on soxinthebasement.com.